AFN Live. It's Sunday night. You're here. We're here. That means it's another episode. Tonight, AFN Live 310-876-8064. Brought to you tonight by PrimetimeSportsTalk.com, at AFN Talk across all social media, and that does include Instagram, AFNTalk.com, AFNN.net. Tonight, we have possible quarterback controversy in Minnesota. The Vikings, the NFL. Yeah, we don't really discuss the NFL, but this does link to an alternative football league. We'll discuss that a little bit later on in the show. Also tonight, we are going to do a CFL special. The whole show is going to be based upon what's happening up north to our sister country in Canada. We also have predictions and possible dark horse candidates considering the playoff picture in the concerning the Grey Cup with the CFL, because we're getting to that time up there. And also tonight, we're going to lead off with, first of all, let me introduce my co-host tonight, Mark Ongst. He is here with me tonight. Mark, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Oh, I'm here. It's Sunday, and another day, I guess $1, maybe. I get 40 cents once taxes get taken out. I'm not sure how that works. What's the percentage up here? It's 66 cents, something like that we get?
66 cents, huh?
I have no idea. I'm just making that up as we go along.
Another day, another $1 late, $1 short.
Whatever, something like that. I don't know, whatever the saying is, that's where we're at right now. I know that the weekend wrapped up this weekend for CFL. We have 5 out of the 6 spots in the playoff picture determined. BC made a statement. They made a big statement with a big victory over Toronto. What was it, 55-6? It was a game that I actually thought Toronto was going to come in and beat BC, mainly because James Franklin was back. I thought another full week of practice under center. Toronto's played tough all year. They've been a lot better than their 2-win record. BC just was like, nope, we're going to crush your dreams.
That's a couple of weeks in a row for BC that they've done that. They did it to Ottawa a couple of weeks ago. Beat a good Alouette team last week, and then did it again to Toronto. So they are playing around at this point. I mean, maybe we should play a little better earlier on, but at least showing something now.
It took a really long time for them to come. Mike Riley really. They really didn't flow well. The team just did not mesh. I don't know if it was Riley's coming in big contract. There was just no uniformity there, and I felt that BC really got off to a very tough start for sure. The win, what the win does for BC though, is it keeps their playoff hopes alive despite having a 5-10 record. Edmonton, the Eskimos currently hold that 6th spot at 7-8. They're only 2 games up. The other 3 teams in the West have clinched, and the top 2 teams in the East have clinched. They all have winning records at this point in time. Is it realistic to think that Mike Riley can lead this team to a playoff berth? Because Edmonton lost Trevor Harris for the year, and that team didn't look the same team this week.
I mean, asking this question next week because they play, but after these last about 3-4 weeks, yes, because I'm looking at BC's probably going to beat Edmonton this coming week. I know how crazy that sounds, but with no Trevor Harris, Edmonton hasn't looked as good, and I think BC could take that game. And that'll put them within 1 game of each other. I'm not sure how their all tiebreakers work, as we go along here. But they have a couple tough games. BC does, but if they can show what they've showed these last few weeks and keep rolling, I don't think Edmonton's holding them off. It's going to come down to how well Mike Riley has really meshed at this point for this team.
Now, after the Edmonton loss, we had talked about Trevor Harris, because during the game they mentioned that Trevor Harris could be back within a 2-week span, and your comment was I think they're going to hold out till the playoffs. And I know that we did BC to do what they did. but you have to start thinking now that Edmonton has to be kind of like maybe eyeballing a certain return for Harris to come back without technically rushing him, because you don't want to rush a guy back from an injury because you're just never going to be 100%, at all to be able to make any type of run in the playoffs. But in order for Edmonton to get to this point, they're going to have to hope that Harris can come back within 2 weeks.
Well, I think this Saturday's game will be the key to them. If they could beat BC, they'll probably hold Harris out as long as they possibly can. If they don't beat them, then I think you'll see him come back after the bye if he's able to. Because that's one thing they actually have, is they have a bye in week 19. That's a nice little end of the season bye for them. But if they lose this coming Saturday, I think we'll see Trevor Harris, back in week 20.
Yeah, well, they're going to have to come up with something. I believe that a win over BC this weekend will clinch the playoff spot for them. It'll be a win and in situation for them, right?
I believe so, because they only have 3 total games left. So with a 2-game lead, for them, I think BC has 4 left. They have 3, with that bye.
And at this particular moment in time, I think BC has a bye here too, because they've both played 15 games.
Oh, yeah, BC must have a bye.
At this moment in time. But a victory would put them 3 games up.
Yep,
so that would definitely have to be a win and in situation for Edmonton. Backup quarterbacks has been kind of the story here for most of the year. We saw Nick Arbuckle. He came out with Calgary and when Bo Levi Mitchell went down, and we'll discuss a little bit more about Bo Levi a little bit later, and really kind of held Calgary team together. It essentially got him into the playoffs. I mean, let's be honest. Calgary lost this week in kind of a shocker. The offense did not look very good. Calgary's problem has been all year has just not been finishing drives. And even with Bo Levi back, they have not been able to finish drives. Is this going to be a problem, a continuing problem for Calgary? We know that the defense is one of the most turnover-efficient defenses in all of the CFL. They love to intercept and cause fumbles, and they get a high amount of sacks. But we can't truly expect Calgary to lean on that defense as much as they have been to be able to get an opportunity and chance to win this Grey Cup, at least in my opinion.
Calgary hasn't really been that dominant since Bo has come back. They've won, but when you look over the games, outside of probably 2 games, and those are both against Edmonton, which are rivalry games for them, big games, so I think they got up for them. Outside of them, 1-point win over Hamilton, which Hamilton's a good team, so that's a good win, but still only a 1-point win. You're only getting 7 against a Toronto team we know isn't good, and then a 4-point loss to the Alouettes. So I don't know if this team, if this defense will be able to hold off all these other teams. They're looking like they're probably going to be the 2 or 3 seed in the West, because I don't know that Saskatchewan's going to give up that 1 seed at this point. So you're getting a game against Winnipeg most likely, which probably would be a win because Strevler has gone back to doing Strevler things.
Winnipeg has been.
Yeah, they've kind of fallen apart here, and I don't know that a game against Calgary is going to get them right. So they'll get to the West final, but I don't know if it's just him coming off that injury. He's not fully healthy. If they haven't had the time to really get in the groove, so maybe by playoff time they'll be there. But that offense has been worrisome so far since he's been back. They've been maybe a little more bigger play with him, but with Arbuckle, I think they were more efficient. And not really giving up. Not getting the big plays, but sustaining more drives that they're not doing now.
And that's where I was going to go with it myself, is because it kind of shifted. Like when Bo Levi came back, and it was something that the Calgary fans wanted, they were all excited about. I mean, even me, I was excited about it because I like watching Bo Levi play. But it kind of shifted. Everything kind of felt different for Calgary. They weren't in the same type of rhythm that they had built with Arbuckle. And it's not necessarily that Arbuckle's necessarily a better quarterback than Bo Levi, because Bo Levi is CFL's most winning. One of the. I think he's the most winningest quarterback up there and up north, or at least the most efficient. And it's just that Arbuckle kind of took this team on his back in a situation where he was efficient, didn't make mistakes, and held them together during a time where things could have easily fallen off the rails. At one point, Arbuckle under center, Calgary looked like they were going to be unstoppable.
Oh yeah, they looked great. He looked great. Right about when he started is when I actually started watching the CFL and getting into it. And I thought he was the starter. I didn't even know he was the backup. He looked that good at first. And then you tell me the guy ahead of him who's injured right now is the back in the CFL, and it's like, well, geez, talk about quarterback rich. You probably have two of the best quarterbacks in the CFL at this point. But Arbuckle was more of the, quote unquote game manager type of quarterback, where Bo is more of the I can win you a game with just me doing it.
And I can lose you a game with me just doing it too.
Yeah.
Saskatchewan looks like they're going to be the hottest team going in. It's going to be hard to see what happens in the West. I want to focus to the East here for a minute, just because the East has been so bad. I know Montreal got in, and I know that they're 8-6, but quarterback problems all over the place. If it wasn't for this defense, because this defense has literally been like we talked about Calgary's defense, but Montreal's defense has literally been the reason why they've won 8 games. Vernon Adams is playing really well now in the last couple weeks, but prior to that team was just a nightmare to watch. You had no idea which team was going to show up.
Oh, that's for sure. They were so up and down. Vernon, looked like a great quarterback one week. Then the next week he'd come out and he'd be the guy who you all kind of expected him to be. And then he gets injured there in the middle of the season there for, I think he only missed one game, but he missed the second half of the other game. And their backup quarterback is not any good. So they cannot be without him, or they really are going to be in trouble. I could see maybe Montreal winning the crossover game, but that's probably because the team they're going to play is not going to be that great at that point. Edmonton could be back to where they should be at that point, but who knows? Harris coming off an injury doesn't mean he's going to be back to the old Harris. So that they could make it to the East final based on just the options, but they're no lock. And to be honest, if they weren't in the East, they probably don't make the playoffs for how good they actually are. I think they're just kind of feasting on.
Well, Toronto's 2-12, Ottawa's 3-11. Ottawa's probably the worst team in the league. They can't get a quarterback situation going up there. That defense has fallen apart. Their playmakers have been completely dreadful. At the beginning of the year, Ottawa looked like they were one of the best teams in the league. This just goes to show that it's a long season for sure. But the East has just been kind of Now, I wanted to bring the East up because the proposal for the expansion team is to be in the East. The Atlantic Schooners. They went through the stadium proposal. Apparently, it didn't get met with decent reviews. With the East being as weak as they are, or at least this year, adding an expansion team doesn't sound like it's going to be beneficial to anybody in the East. How bad is this shift of power going to be? What is this going to do for the power shift where the West just beats up on each other? Is it possible that we could see 3 teams sneak in next year from the East just because of the potential expansion team that's going to be there? Or are we going to see something with this much of a discrepancy again?
Well, everything I've read says that the only time we've ever had a crossover in the CFL is because the West has the 4th team to do it. I don't believe the East has ever been good enough that they've crossed over and taken a West spot. So that just tells you right there that the West Division overall has been probably the best division in the CFL for ever. And an expansion team isn't going to change that, at least in the first 3 to 5 years, because we all know expansion teams don't usually come out. Yes, I know in hockey, the Las Vegas Raiders or Las Vegas Knights.
Golden Knights,
Golden Knights came out, played great, waited to the Stanley Cup Finals their first season. That's rare. It doesn't usually happen.
Yeah, it does not happen very often.
So I don't think it's going to happen in the CFL either. So at this point, you're going to look at, they'll probably have 2 teams and possibly a third if the West has an off year, and that's all you're going to get at this point. It's almost to the point where they have to maybe look at redoing these divisions or looking at a new way to do it or doing something different, because it doesn't seem like it's going to get any different at the way it is.
I mean, and again, I want to clarify for our listeners out there who don't really know much about the CFL or follow the CFL that often, is very rarely do these guys get long-term contracts. There's really no such thing on the CFL level. I think the longest term contract is 3 years, maybe 4 tops, maybe in some rare case you get 5, but it's not. It's super rare. But I believe it's 3 is like the max that's usually given out. And a lot of that is because these contracts aren't guaranteed. They're not like the NFL, at least everything that I've read. But the CFL is also very, very, very protective of their contracts. So a lot of contract terms are not released to the public. So the public does not get anything more than just the year of what the player is going to be for that team. So either they go into a unrestricted free agent situation and they can sign for another CFL, or they go to a different league. And that is something that we have seen with CFL players before. So when we discuss the power and balance, it's not unlikely for some of these guys to leave. Like Nick Arbuckle's situation, we discussed him earlier. He's a free agent at the end of the year. He could switch and go to the East and maybe see that balance, but it's not. It's very rare do we see something like that along those lines. So when we discuss the power balances and stuff like that, these players aren't locked into these terms, and they can leave the team at any given time to head somewhere else. 310-876-8064. That's the phone number if you want to call. Give us a comment. Come in, join the discussion. We're here. If you have any thoughts, opinions, anything along those lines, questions for us even, feel free to give us a call at AFN Talk across all social media on every platform you can think of. We're brought to you tonight by PrimetimeSportsTalk.com and AFNTalk.com. AFN.net produces the show. And our producers, Harry the Boots Bob. We're going to move into the Grey Cup predictions here in a minute. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm your host, Michael Washington Weeks. 310-876-8064. Before the break, we were discussing the playoffs. 5 out of 6 spots are locked in. We have the crossover between BC and Edmonton. Basically, it's come down to them because nobody else from the East is going to be involved. At AFN Talk across all social media platform. Brought to you tonight by PrimetimeSportsTalk.com. Mark, now, from what I know, as far as the CFL playoffs are concerned, 6 out of the 9 teams make it, which we've discussed. Top 2, I'm assuming, get buys. And then, from what I'm gathering, this crossover is the last spot. So it's like the 6th seed gets in, but they play in whichever division has the least amount of teams. That's what I'm gathering here. So, like, right now, Edmonton, which is in the West, they'll play Montreal. Is that what I'm getting?
Yep. So the first weekend will be what they consider the 2 and 3 seeds from each side, so the East and the West. They play each other. Whichever team wins goes on to play the 1 seed from the East or West, whichever division they're in. So,
okay, all right. That's what I gathered. I just wanted to make sure I had it right. So,
Yep.
So right now, as it sits, Edmonton, which we've discussed, they have a 2-game lead on BC. BC's not out of it yet. With the crossover situation, let's just hypothetically speak here for a second, okay? Let's just say Edmonton keeps the spot, and they go in and get it, and they have to play Montreal in the East. What's your prediction on this game? What's a preview that you would see with this game? And let's assume that Trevor Harris comes back for this game. Let's say they keep him out for this game. What's your preview on this? I just want your thoughts on what this game would be like, and potential outcome. What your prediction would be for the outcome for that game?
I think it would be a great game, only because Trevor Harris is a good quarterback. Montreal seems to have these up and down games, but I could see them, all being able to kind of rally for this. And based on the fact that Trevor Harris is either going to be playing his second, third game back, I 100% believe Montreal wins that game. I think Montreal will win the crossover game, no matter if it's against them or BC. I think Montreal wins. I think they would be able to, kind of rally that defense as a team, and it's home field. They'll play at home, even though they may have the worst record, whatever. But they'll be the home team, so I think Montreal wins it.
See, and this is where I think that you and I are going to differ on this talk. Here is, even with Vernon Adams' upswing and playing the way that they are, the offense still has issues that they need to work out. And I think that is something that it could still obviously mesh over time, and Montreal could end up proving me wrong and just go undefeated here and whatever else. And for the rest of the way, and go into the crossover game with all the momentum in the world. I feel like that if Edmonton is the one that slides into this spot, though, getting Trevor Harris back is going to be such a shot in the arm for the Eskimos that this is going to end up being something that Edmonton is going to need. And I think that Edmonton can go in and beat Montreal. I don't think there's a team in the West that is underneath Montreal per se, as far as talent-wise is concerned. I think Montreal would better fare against BC, but that's only if BC returns to the BC that we were seeing at the first half of the year, because the BC that we're seeing right now is a completely different team. And it's a team that I think Mike Riley has finally got this team to believe in who he is and how he is as a quarterback and a leader. And BC is a team that could cause damage if they get to that crossover. I'll leave it at that. Let's go to the other side, Mark. Let's go to the other side. Let's go to the West. Let's go Calgary, Winnipeg. We discussed a little bit about Streveler, and
Yeah.
Tim Tebow Streveler, whatever you want to call him. We discussed him and already a little bit, but I want to get a preview for this one, because this is a game that, and mind you, this may not stay, by the way, because Calgary's still only one game out of first. I mean, I know that they lost this week and it kind of, hurt them a little bit in the standings, but they're the top three teams are still within a game and a half of each other, so these can change. But as it sits right now is what we want to discuss about. And Calgary, Winnipeg. A preview, Mark. Give us your little bit of thoughts on this game. What if this was the game that was cemented here?
So I could 100% believe maybe Bo Levi has been kind of holding back a little bit, kind of taking it slow, saving himself for the playoffs, because as we've all kind of figured out, he's one of the best in the playoffs. That won the Grey Cup last year as outstanding player 2 years in a row. So I think with that defense, the way that offense could work, they have a good running game. They have like 4 or 5 running backs that they end up using in a game, and they're all pretty good. So they could go with the hot hand, run it out, pass the ball to the running backs. Their wide receivers, they spread it around like crazy. They're one of the best teams. I just think with the injury to Bo Levi, they've had some up and downs and some growing pains with it. I would take them over this Winnipeg team at this point. I feel like the way Winnipeg was playing in the beginning of the year and with Nichols and how it's kind of gone lately, I feel like they're losing their mojo that they had, and the defense I think is being put on the field more and more often because of Strevler and not being able to sustain drives and the way he plays, that they're just going to be worn out by the time they get there. And at this point, I don't know that Winnipeg would be able to beat Edmonton in the playoffs with how they've been playing lately. So I could easily see Calgary or Saskatchewan winning that game no matter what.
I want to clarify. I mean, for me personally, like, I like this Winnipeg team. I think that this Winnipeg team is one of the more well-rounded teams, but that was with Matt Nichols at quarterback. Chris Strevler, he is so. Why do I always say Strevler first? Strevler. He's such a unfortunately one-dimensional type player that it really hinders an offense that has the potential to be explosive if they had a quarterback that could be explosive. Matt Nichols was proving it. I mean, Darvin Adams didn't even play for the first few games this year, and he's one of the best receivers in all of football at the CFL level. And I think Darvin Adams, he hung around Minnesota with the Vikings for a little bit, but never really latched on to any team on a main roster. He's a guy who could play in the NFL. I think he's talented enough to be in the NFL level, if you want my honest opinion. Does that mean that he would ever get a shot in the NFL? Probably not, because this is one of those situations where the NFL doesn't really like to bring in guys from other leagues for some reason, or they don't really actually give them an opportunity and chance. But with that being said, this Winnipeg team is really well-rounded. They're very gritty and grimy, but Calgary, there's just something about this Calgary team that if they can get Bo Levi on to the level that Arbuckle was playing when Levi was hurt, it can catapult that Calgary team to the next level. So I'm going to go back to the East now. So we discussed this. You said Montreal. I want to go Montreal and Hamilton would be your East playoff, your East Conference division, whatever you want to call it, final. Where's your prediction here? What's the thought process with this game? And do we see an upset possibly?
No. And you're not going to see an upset if it's Montreal or Edmonton or BC, any of the three. Hamilton right now is the best team in the CFL, and they are proving it at the most important time. Dane Evans has decided to be a great quarterback. There was a point in the season when I said that they should trade for Arbuckle because Dane was not doing it, but he has turned it around. They look like the most well-rounded team. They've scored the most points than any other team has. And I don't see that slowing down in the playoffs at all. Not for these guys. I think they'll maybe start to rest guys, knowing that they are the top seed in the East and have that bye locked up. But I don't know how the CFL does that. This is my first year, so we'll see. But nobody's beaten them from that crossover game, or even the Montreal Alouettes. No way.
Yeah. I think that the East probably doesn't have to play a game. I think they can just put Hamilton right into the Grey Cup, honestly. I don't want to write off any of the other teams. I don't want to write off BC, Edmonton, Montreal at all. As much as I would love to see Hamilton and BC play in the East Finals, I think that would be fantastic to watch, personally. If BC's playing at the level that they're playing at. Or even Edmonton. I would see Trevor Harris go in and take on Dane Evans. But Hamilton is, as you said, probably the best team in the league right now. And Dane Evans, the turnaround that he had from the first two games that we saw him play, I remember you and I sitting there going, wow. Like, I don't know about this Dane Evans guy. And then he became a staple for us pretty much in every single one of our CFL fantasy lineups. We just ended up starting him because he was just playing at a level that was so much higher than other people at that position.
He's become so good that he's too expensive to play at this point.
If you want to put together a solid balanced squad, yeah, no, finding guys at like the cheapest level possible, the guys that might score a touchdown with one catch for 100 and one catch for like 64 yards and a touchdown if you're lucky. So let's go to the West then, because the West seems like it's more loaded at the top half, which we expected. It's a little more unpredictable at that spot. So let's just say we'll go with you. We'll say Calgary, Saskatchewan. Well, I said Calgary too. So Calgary, Saskatchewan. The Rough Riders right now with Cody Fajardo at the helm. Fajardo was a backup quarterback to start off the year too. The starter actually ended up getting traded and then didn't see the field. The Rough Riders are trending in a direction that some might argue that they're the best team in the league. But how do you see the West final playing out between Saskatchewan and Calgary? And regardless if it's the 1-2, if it's in Calgary or Saskatchewan, whichever way you want to look at it, let's just stick with what we have. So it's in Saskatchewan at this point in time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that part will matter as much for these teams. These Western teams kind of seem to be good enough to go on the road play. They're just good teams overall. So I think the matchup, whoever it is between the three of them, I'll put Winnipeg in there just because it will be a great matchup. I mean, they're all three of these teams could be the number 1 seed in the West at the end of the season, could be the 3 seed. They're so good, but the way the Riders are playing lately, it's hard to bet against them. And I mean, Fajero has really been a eye opener this year compared to what I've seen about him before, where he bounced around from team to teams. And finally latched on, but he's really made this team legitimate, and it's hard to pick against them, but I'm gonna go with my team. Calgary is my team, and I'm gonna go with Bo.
Going with a little homer pick here, huh?
I'm gonna ride with Bo. I think him being who he is, he turns it on in the playoffs, and in a end of the game heroics, hits a touchdown for the win. That's what I'm going with.
Saskatchewan at one point in time looked like I remember seeing a lot of power rankings with them being like ranked like 6th, 7th, situation, stuff like that. Like, this turnaround for this team though has been phenomenal. The receiving core, Shaquille Evans of all people, Shaq Evans, he has been absolutely sensational for them. Until someone knocks off Bo Levi Mitchell, I'm going to have to agree with you. Playoff sports, man, playoff football. Bo Levi Mitchell is a gamer, and he's proven it in the playoffs before. I'll put Calgary in there against Hamilton, and we got a couple minutes here. I want to discuss this Grey Cup matchup between Hamilton and Calgary. I want your prediction. I want a score prediction. And just to see what it's like there. I just want to see what your thoughts are on this one.
Well, just so you know, if it is Calgary versus Hamilton, that is a home game for the Stampeders, because it is in McMahon Stadium, the Grey Cup this year.
Yes, it is.
So that matters, because you get, I'm sure the way they sell tickets, the other team gets a better chance than normal, but you're still going to get more home fans. It's a tough matchup to pick, because Hamilton has looked great. But again, I mean, how do you, if Bo gets there, how do you bet against them? But I'm going to go with Hamilton, because I think overall they've been the most complete team these last few weeks, finally getting Dane in the groove. And I think they just keep rolling. And I'm going to go with a 38-36 Hamilton win. Game-winning field goal.
Yeah, I'm there with you. I'm going to go with Hamilton, man. And I think that this is going to be a story that CFL historians and fans alike are going to talk about for a long time, especially when it comes to Dane Evans, backup quarterback, getting an opportunity and chance to start, leading his team to a Grey Cup, then leading his team to a Grey Cup victory, leading his team to a Grey Cup victory in the stadium that against the team that plays in that stadium. Hamilton, I think that this is your Grey Cup to lose at this particular moment in time. 310-876-8064. If you have any comments, questions, anything along those lines, talk to us. Give us your thoughts about the Grey Cup, your predictions. We're here at AFN Talk across all social media, afntalk.com, afnn.net, and we're brought to you tonight by primetimesportstalk.com. On the other side of this quick break, we are going to discuss comments that Bo Levi Mitchell made this week pertaining to a possible quarterback controversy with the NFL's Minnesota Vikings. Welcome back to AFN Live. I'm your host, Michael Washington Weeks. I'm here tonight with my co-host, Mark Onks. We're talking CFL special, I guess you could call it tonight. 310-876-8064. If you have any questions, comments, want to join the discussion at all, you're more than welcome to. Before the break, we were discussing Grey Cup and we were discussing the playoff picture. But now I want to focus on something a little bit different. This past week, I guess Bo Levi Mitchell decided to make some interesting comments about his tryout with the Minnesota Vikings in December last year. Let me rephrase this. Let me restart this. He didn't make interesting. He made interesting comments. He absolutely 100 made interesting comments. He went on record on I guess it's his own show. It's called The Bo Show on Sportsnet 960 The Fan, where he said, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to take Kirk's job. Now, I want us to stop before I finish the rest of that. That's a very bold statement. Wouldn't you say, Mark? That's a very bold statement for a CFL quarterback to make.
Oh, I mean, it is. But, going off the rest of his comment that goes along with that, he points out, I've won, in high school, I've won in college, I've won Division III, Division I, I've won in the CFL. So, I mean, can you really say he isn't a winner and could take Kirk's job? I mean, yes, he's never done it in the NFL, but he's never been given a shot to do it in the NFL. We all know how the NFL feels about letting anybody into their little club. Outside of the college football players, maybe, and honestly, the way he plays, the way Kirk is playing, I don't see how he wouldn't be taking his job. I mean, outside of this week when you played the Giants, but I think he could have, maybe taken his job, but in general, could have at least caused some competition, which is good.
So Bo Levi, as we've discussed, he's a two-time Most Outstanding Player award up north. Won the Grey Cup last year. The guy's a winner. We all know that he's a winner. This was the finishing of that quote, though, because this is one of the more interesting and baffling parts to this. It says, his reply to me was, quote, "No, we don't want you to do that. We want you to come in here and have a good quarterback room, help teach him things, help be a supporter of him, but we don't want you causing a controversy," unquote. Now, again, this is coming from Bo Levi himself, so we kind of have to take this a little bit with a grain of salt because we have to figure out whether or not how much of this is truth. Nobody's come out and disputed this, though. So at this point, that to me is a very weird statement to make. And Mitchell touches base on it a little bit later on, where he says, I don't understand that thought process. All that tells me is there's a culture in that building right now that, hey, your job is secure because of the money we paid you. Don't worry about anything you do or the decisions you make or anything the media says. Just do what we tell you to do, and we're going to be fine. And I don't disagree with him here on that note, because I feel like, especially in a situation in Minnesota where they have, who is it, Kyle Slaughter and Sean Mannion right now as their backups.
Sure.
I mean, there's just
they don't have anybody. That's what they don't want anybody.
So why would you? I mean, here's the thing. So if the Minnesota Vikings had an injury to Kirk Cousins, what do they expect to do? They expect to hope to find somebody, to come off the street that hasn't been in camp, that hasn't been there over the course of a few weeks. Why not give this guy from the CFL, who clearly has a bunch of accolades, who clearly has a bunch of, a winning tradition, to come in and compete for this? It doesn't necessarily have to be for Cousins' jobs, but it wouldn't hurt Cousins to get the competition.
This tells me one of two things. Either Cousins has the worst confidence of any quarterback in the league, that he can't have anybody around him that possibly could take his job or he'll crumble, or that the Minnesota Vikings do things in that building that make absolutely no sense at this point, because to not want competition for the most important position on the field makes no sense. I mean, how many times do we hear quarterbacks or coaches come out and say, we want competition, I'm bringing guys in to create competition at every level of this team, and they do it. I mean, Bruce Arians did it with Tampa. Every new coach comes in, and that's what they say. We're going to create competition because all the players are new to them. For Mike Zimmer, why? Why not? It's not like Kirk was great last year either. So why not bring something in and try something new at this point? It didn't go great last year. With Kirk.
I think the biggest, not to kind of echo what you're saying, Mark. I feel like Kirk Cousins has a terrible record against teams with winning records. I think he has single-digit wins against any team with a winning record. So Mike Zimmer has seen this firsthand. As a Washington Redskins fan, I saw it for years. Competition's good. And maybe it's because of what he went through with RG3 that he doesn't want to have that.
But again, he was on the other side of that, where he was the guy that was picked later, wasn't supposed to be the guy, was supposed to come in and help the other guy out. Maybe he did.
Right.
But you proved that you were a good quarterback, kind of, in that sense. I mean, you played on a team that wasn't that great, so maybe you could point out winning was harder with that team. But Case Keenum went 13-3 with this team, and Kirk can't even win 8-9 games with them. And they've been putting better players with Kirk than Case had.
And missed the playoffs as well.
Yeah, in a season when they were coming off getting blown out in the NFC Championship game, so they felt like, okay, we need to get a more explosive quarterback, which they thought they were getting with Kirk, and couldn't make the playoffs with the guy who was supposed to be better than who you replaced. And now you're telling me you're not going to have competition, so nobody in that building is going to ever get better. You're just going to be the guy you are. We paid you money. Be what you are. When you're done, you're done. Oh, well, and we'll move on to somebody else.
Now, Bo Levi Mitchell goes ahead and says something that I find to be 150% completely asinine and makes me question how serious he really is that he wants to play in the NFL. He finishes off his quote statement with, I would have came in and I'd been throwing the ball deep every play. If you put me with Adam Thielen, Stephon Diggs, Kyle Rudolph, sorry, Dalvin Cook, but the ball is going down the field. Okay, I understand as a quarterback and the mentality of wanting to throw the ball and push the ball down the field. But also as a quarterback, you're a leader. You're supposed to be a team leader. If you do not recognize that Dalvin Cook is the best player on that Minnesota Vikings offensive team, which clearly Bo Levi does not recognize that, then you clearly are going to set yourself up for failure. Now, with a comment like that and an attitude like that, could have just been more or less that was Minnesota's way of just being kind of nice and saying, we're going to kind of sugarcoat this for you, but your attitude sucks and we don't want you here?
The way I look at that comment, you got to remember he comes from the CFL. And what the CFL does is they are wide open offenses. We have to remember that. They don't use the running back as much as the NFL uses the running back. But I take that comment going kind of, I think, as a dig to Kirk Cousins, or maybe that offense, that they don't throw it deep to these guys enough, saying, put me out there. I'll do it. But I think that just comes with the kind of guy Bo seems to be. He's very, very confident, cocky kind of guy. And when you're winning a lot, you kind of get that way because you win a lot. So it's hard to not be that, fine line of, are you really confident or are you just cocky? And who knows what he said in the interview to, and could they have sugarcoated or whatever. I just, to make the comments to somebody that you don't want to create a competition for a guy, whether they were 100% true or not, you haven't proven that they aren't. Nobody's come out and said anything to this. You don't have quarterbacks in the room that are pushing Kirk Cousins at all. Nobody behind him, anybody's calling for them to play. It's not like you brought in a backup quarterback like a Chase Daniels or like a Nick Foles. Anybody,
even Josh McCown,
anybody that could be a starting quarterback in the NFL. The guys you got aren't, and they're literally just there to hold a clipboard and say, "Hey, Kirk, you may have missed something here. Remember this for next time." That's it. That's all you have in that room. So to that point and to everything we see kind of with Minnesota, I'm in the sense to believe Bo and just believe he went in there going, he had a tryout, so they watched him on the field, and he probably went, "You saw what I am. You've seen what I've been. I'll come in and take the job if he doesn't play well enough." And
I personally think Bo Levi Mitchell could have taken his job.
The way he's playing, yes.
I fully 100% feel like Bo Levi Mitchell could easily take Kirk Cousins' job. And it's nothing against Kirk Cousins. I think Kirk Cousins is a fine quarterback. I just think he's just fine, though. I think that he can't win the big game. I think that he's proven that he can't win the big game. I feel like that it's something that that he'll never be able to win that big game. Even if they make the playoffs, I think they're going to be a one and done. They're going to be similar to Cincinnati Bengals and Andy Dalton. Because I don't think Kirk Cousins can do it. Any team with a winning record that Minnesota plays ends up just stomping on Minnesota because Kirk Cousins just makes such poor decisions, poor plays. He tries to do too much and doesn't rely on the guys around him. And I think that we saw the frustration with Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs. And I understand that Bo Levi Mitchell would want to come in and be that gunslinger and push the ball down the field. But you can't neglect Dalvin Cook. And I think that that's one of the things that kind of rubs me the wrong way in this situation, because as a quarterback, you can't deny or just ignore the best player that's out there, no matter how good Diggs and Thielen is.
Well, but again, that comment may not be kind of the way that I'm just going to ignore him. I think he's looking at it going, I got these three guys here, or they have these three guys, and they're some of the best wide receivers in the game. I'm going to push the ball, but again, that's when he comes in the NFL, it could be coached out of him, or he could kind of learn, or whatever. I think it just was he's on his show, so he's going to be like, this is what I'll do. It's I take that kind of comment more as I'm a gunslinger. They got these guys. This is what I would do.
That's fair. And like I said, I think Bo Levi Mitchell could take Kirk Cousins' job. I think Bo Levi Mitchell could be a starting quarterback in the NFL. If not a starting quarterback, at least a high-end, backup that comes in and is fairly successful, similar to like a Chase Daniel or, in this case, even like a Jacoby Brissett, in Indianapolis, where he's, played at a fairly high level. 310-876-8064. If you have any comments out there, just let us know your thoughts on it. Join the discussion. We're at AFN Talk across all social media platforms, afntalk.com, afnn.net. Brought to you tonight by primetimesportstalk.com. We have a little bit of a special for you guys tonight. We're going to go into a little bit of an overtime here. We have AFT Arena Football Talks. Brice Burge is with us tonight, and we got a special here on the other side of this break where we're going to discuss the CIF and NAL partnership and kind of get a little more insight as to what's going down right there. So we'll be right back. Welcome to AFN Live Overtime. I'm Michael Washington Weeks. Right now, we want to bring a special segment to you guys. I have Arena Football Talks Brice Burge with me. Brice, how you doing, my man? Let's start with the formalities here. How you doing?
I'm all right. It's been a long day, and still keep going, and I have a radio show now. So,
well, hey, tell us a little bit about the radio show. I mean, by all means, go ahead.
Well, AFT Buzz is a nice little radio show. We're actually approaching our 50th episode next week, covering all aspects of the indoor and arena games. Started out about a year ago, and been in a partnership between Arena Football Talk and 920 WN, the Apple out of Brooklyn, New York. And we've been kind of putting that together, and it's been working out pretty well when schedule allows. And the off season has been a little bit difficult for the scheduling for sure this time around. But that's the way that life goes sometimes. But it's a pretty solid show with a chance for a lot of different insights into why the indoor game can really provide some great opportunities for understanding how football works and enjoying the sport as a whole.
Now, speaking about opportunities, earlier this year, you reported on a potential National Arena League and Indoor Football League merger. And talks kind of fell through and nothing was going to happen, at least for the 2019 season heading into the 2020 season. So those talks were kind of tabled. Recently, it came out that the National Arena League and the Champions Indoor Football, now, from my gathering, the Champions Indoor Football is a Midwest smaller market or medium to smaller market league that kind of mirrors the IFL. They get kind of a rivalry going on. Have entered discussions, I think it was back in June, from everything that was released, and they have come to an agreement to partner, not merge, partner, for the 2020
a very
season.
Very important distinction.
Yes,
that has caused so many problems across the sport as a whole. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off on that.
By all means, I wanted to make sure that I emphasize that because you have been very vocal about the fact that this is a partnership and not a merger, which it appears that one side wants you to think one thing and the other side is being a little more open and honest about what it is. If you want to elaborate, go ahead by all means, Brice.
This is a tough scenario because what it comes down to sounds like semantics about whether it's a partnership, a merger, an absorption, that kind of stuff. But the reason why these things have to be correctly identified is because of the legal implications of the words used. And on the show this week, I actually talked about a case that dealt with a labor union that sued for $3.5 million against an aluminum factory, if I believe correct. It was an aluminum or an iron factory. Because of an Oxford comma. And wow. The way that implicated how the rights are, how the benefits were to be disseminated amongst the family members of the union.
Oh, that's
so.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Wow. So when you're talking about these kind of deals about legal terminology, there is a vast difference between two groups that are partnering together and a group that is merging with another group. And merging can happen a couple different ways. You've got your absorptions where one completely disbands and then everything falls into one. You could have both entities dissolve to a certain level and then become underneath a brand new entity. You've got the opportunity for a third entity to be created and then buy out the things underneath, which is what happens a lot when you think about Nestle and Coca-Cola and how they have all these little sub brands like Keebler or Fruitopia or Minute Maid or stuff like that. That's kind of how all those companies get all those different things. And why that's big is it all comes down to what legal entities are in play and what powers do they actually have. And in this case, what this partnership has been described as by the official released video that had CIF Commissioner Ricky Burtz and NAL Commissioner Chris Siegfried is that this was basically going to be a uniting of championship belts. This was going to be old school boxing format. This was going to be Canadian box lacrosse. This was going to be South African cricket when they were dealing with integration of their sports after the apartheid. This was going to be a way to bring in those leagues together to be copacetic with one another, so that way you could have bigger games that meant something instead of dealing with something else later down the line. And why that's a big deal is because if it's a merger, then that means that these two things are coming together and coming into one legal entity in some way or the other. And that would have so many tax-based issues, salary cap issues, just headaches beyond reproach. But with a partnership, you have the ability to say, like, hey, this isn't working out, we're going to step away. A partnership in a situation like this where non-conference games now become credible, and not like an emergency fill-in situation like the AAL had this year, but like an actual opportunity for them to say, hey, you know, you can go out and, you know, this week of the season, you can go out and schedule this opponent from this other league, and it's not going to be that big of a deal. With the way that this kind of went down, there's so many different opportunities that a partnership would allow the two leagues. Both of them have pros and cons to them right now. Both of them, I believe, are beneath what the IFL and the AFL are. But at this point, they've got a lot of positives that they can work off of.
Yeah, and I think that it's important to also bring up the fact that they're merging their resources, as they quote unquote said, not merging the leagues and everything else. They said they're merging their resources. By pooling your resources together, it makes more sense to be able to, at least in my opinion, it makes more sense to be able to have a sustainable league of sorts, if you want to put it under one umbrella or however you want to do it, to be able to be sustainable for longevity purposes. And my only question to you, Brice, here in this situation is looking at the geographical footprint. And I mentioned this in our chat, earlier. One of these do not belong, and right now, the way that it looks, and I'm sure that the NAL is planning on adding teams and expanding at some point in time. They just haven't released anything yet as to what their plans are. But Maine seems to be kind of like a sore thumb here. Like they're sticking out away from this in the geographical footprint, at least on the NAL side. We know that the CIF added Odessa, or at least they announced the expansion of Odessa, so that gives the CIF side of things 7 teams. What are we looking at for the NAL to try to fill that gap? Because right now they only have 5. As we know, the Massachusetts Pirates left and the New York Streets aren't coming, with. So what are we looking at here? What's the viable options for NAL to just not rush expansion teams in to just make up the difference here? You got to figure that there's going to be a balance, you would think, right? For teams.
Well, initially, when you were thinking about it, it's more like a 6-6 kind of deal. And technically, if you wanted to do 7-on-7 and then just have a non-standings, or a 5-on-7 and then have 2 CIF teams play each other in a non-standings game, That could be a possibility too. I mean, Wichita and Oklahoma definitely had some struggles last year. So if you were trying to like match up which ones were the best, you'd have to remove Duke City because Duke City left for the IFL this last season. So you've got Jacksonville versus Salina, which is a very, very good team. And then after that, you've got your two playoff teams in Omaha and Amarillo. Amarillo is better than Omaha. So you'd have Carolina versus Amarillo. You'd have Omaha versus Massachusetts, but Massachusetts isn't there. So you'd have Omaha versus Columbus and have those two together. And then it would probably be Sioux City and Orlando and, maybe Oklahoma after that, depending on how you want to look at them versus Wichita. But the thing is that even though that they have this setup the way that it was based on a couple of different points, and right now the whole process of the thing is in jeopardy. And this is something that is developing, and I'm finally, with some extra information that I got today, ready to kind of say this publicly because I was able to verify it. But the way that the information came out with the confusion over merger versus partnership, which I was able to effectively call out the CIF because I took a photo of that or a screenshot of the CIF and the NAL sharing that announcement video. The CIF called it a partnership. The NAL called it a partnership, the CIF called it a merger, and the CIF changed that. They edited that description. And to my knowledge, there's only 3 people that have control of that official CIF Facebook page, which means that the CIF was immorally and unethically leaking information to people in the indoor football world to manipulate what was going on and to manipulate crowd support in favor of the CIF.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that I think you had touched base on, prior to all this when it first broke overnight. There was another, I guess, I don't know, another. I don't know what word I'm looking for, but just another site that reported that it was going to be a merger, and they stuck by it 100%. Even when you had wrote your article debunking that it was a merger, things were still coming out as merger. So there was rumor at that point in time that there was going to be a potential in jeopardy thing because of information being leaked. And as you just said, it appears it came from one side. It came from one side instead of the other. So what's the likelihood that we see this partnership follow all the way through to the 2020 season?
50%. It's a coin flip.
It's a coin flip at this moment in time.
Yeah, because the thing is that when you have agreements like this, I went through and I verified every single thing that they came up from this. Massachusetts Pirates left because they considered it a merger. That's why they weren't on there. And so the New York Streets folded all together, but the Pirates could come back to the NAL when it all pops up. I was just going to ask about that. Yeah. And so that whole factor in it is extremely disruptive. But the reason why us real journalists, the people that actually work for newspapers and have had the proper education, do not report on active business deals, why I did not report on the IFL NAL merger, an actual merger in that case, was because they were still at the table. They were negotiating. All the things, every single thing that page said was accurate to one specific point that was being made by one person trying to get their way. Mm-hmm. And that's why it's very frustrating. And even when I was hearing things from the IFL and NAL side, Like, I took it with a grain of salt because you could see how the discussions were happening. And you can't interfere with that. And so this page goes out there, a page that has told Rob Storm, the owner of the Carolina Cobras, that he was wrong about a Carolina issue. This page has come out and done some very, very terrible stuff, but they're just right enough, but they don't have the ability to express what is just a theory, what's like a loose agreement to start working on some of the nitty-gritty stuff so that way it could actually come to fruition. This group has multiple times now come out and said stuff that could just potentially be a possibility because people are discussing to try to make the sport stronger, and they don't. They don't make it stronger because some idiot hiding behind a Facebook page is going out there and telling them potentials, wildest dreams. You know, like if you go up and you get hired for a job, you have a contract, you have a basic understanding of what you deal with. If you're selling a house, then you have to have different checks. If you want checks and balances with your credit and surveys and all this other kind of stuff. If you wanted to build a pole barn on your farm, you still got to talk with your government agencies to figure out if it's going to disrupt the watershed or something like that. There are checks and balances that sounds like a great idea, but when you actually put the work in, maybe it's not as feasible as you think. And 100% of the time, if there's a possibility of a great thing popping up, that page in particular will make sure that everybody knows about it while people are trying to get the nitty-gritty stuff in. And people are overwhelming them about the people, not the pages, but the people that would be involved in these decisions with absolute nonsense, fanboy, moronic opinions to the way that it doesn't. There's a lot of people here that don't understand how the sport works, and there are a lot of people that have money and make decisions and still don't understand how the sport works either. You could tell that they've never worked in the front office of a sports agency group or team in their life to make sure that this stuff actually happens. And it annoys the crap out of me because just so much harm that they're willing to do because they are this bastardization of being the first one out there. It's a joke. As a journalist, I'm insulted. It's almost like that page is the kind of trope about journalists that you have to sleep with a source just to get the information. And it's just wrong and unethical in every single way, and they don't understand that. They think they're doing the right thing when they couldn't be doing anything worse.
Yeah, I would have to say that it's highly unfortunate that we have pages like that and that we have situations like that. And the fact that we still have information being leaked to, pages like that. And it's unfortunate. And it, like you said, it's a slap in the face because then, certain things like credible journalists such as yourself get tied up into the situation and things get crowded and incorrect about you. There's assumptions made about you and everybody involved with you. It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate. That's where I'll keep it for the show.
I got my first piece of hate mail covering the sport about this.
Oh man, and I still understand how your name was even tied into it. That's what I don't understand.
Because I debunked it, and that's the thing. Unfortunately, I had to debunk the whole all naked arena league thing that a different page had bought hook, line, and sinker when it was just a crude joke. That was being put on YouTube during games. I had to debunk this because people, what the guy that sent the hate mail said was that it was close enough. It was close enough, and that it was
But
a
it's
merger.
not close enough.
It isn't. It's not
close
at the slightest.
It's not even close to being close enough.
But that's the thing, though, is that you get people that, this sport to survive relies on the rabidness of a fan, because you have to be dedicated. You have to be the ones that are like. I went to a Green Bay game this year, and I saw one of the owner's brothers getting to a fight with a parking lot attendant over tailgating. And to be completely fair, that parking lot attendant was a grade A jackass. And he got in trouble with it, not because of the powers that be, but because he handled that completely wrong 100% of the time. All he had to do was ask for receipts for extra parking spaces paid for, and he would have been just fine. But he didn't do it that way. He came over yelling and kicking over coolers and stuff like that. So, you have that. I've seen fans that, are standing in the middle of the rain for a pregame party. I've seen fans that get things shipped in from states 800 miles away and collect different game balls and stuff like that. And it's a requirement of the financial stability of the sport to be able to do that. Now, the other side of this is that they lack an opportunity for real information. And real information, thanks to the CIF page and thanks to that wording about merging resources, if you look at it, there were a number of real newspapers, Jacksonville, Omaha, Kansas City, Jefferson City, that went out and wrote articles saying that it was a merger. And then Jacksonville ran a correction over it, which is a big deal too. For a newspaper to run a correction over it is a big deal. So when you look at how these things are all overlapped with it, it is exceptionally important to understand the difference, and it's exceptionally important for groups like us here at AFNN or with AFT Buzz, whatever that kind of stuff is. Accuracy is so important because ultimately we've got rabid, hungry fans that are looking for more information about the sport and want to cover the Green Bay Blizzard as ferociously as the Green Bay Packers, and you just do not have the manpower for it. You do not have the ability to pay for it. I mean, I took 3 weeks off from the show just because I am getting worked to the bone over at the newspaper. And, you get some really great guys in here that, some of them have disability and they have money based on that. Some of them, they married into money and their wife is the breadwinner. And so they focus on this. A couple of the smaller guys are stay-at-home dads or stay-at-home moms. They put out content as they're available to. And you get completely ransacked by a couple of other pages, whether they do good or bad. If they've got the time to dedicate to it, you could be the best. Like you could be fresh off a Pulitzer and still be treated like you don't know anything if you don't have the time to just have that name and brand recognition as a trusted source.
And very wise words from your Brice there for sure. That's 100% all just truth right there. Brice, before we wrap things up real quick, man, I just want to ask you, because you mentioned Massachusetts possibly could come back in. There was talk of supposedly or a slight inclination that the West Virginia Rough Riders could possibly end up making it into the NAL side of this partnership. What's the likelihood that we start out this partnership, if it goes through for the 2020 season, with the same amount of teams on both sides? And what's the percentage that we see West Virginia and Massachusetts on the NAL side of things? And just a percentage. I mean, just what your best educated guess would be, I guess, is the best way to put this.
I don't know.
I got to put you on the spot, I
know. Let me tell you why, and I hope this isn't too long, but despite when these things pop up, when bad journalists get like wind of some of these kind of things,
right?
They have a way of riling up the fan base to a point where the leagues immediately start to struggle with each other, because not only do you have like the public input aspect of things, you also have the fact that a lot of people just don't like each other.
Yes.
Like the Sioux City Bandits and the Sioux Falls Storm, those ownership groups would kill each other if they had the opportunity to. Well, not anymore, because Sioux Falls Storm has a new owner, but there are a lot of people that don't like Ricky Burtz for stunts that he pulled when he was working with Anchorage and Billings and Casper in the IFL back when the IFL was just getting started. There are people that don't like Chris Siegfried because of the way that he walked out on his first job. Or for all the decisions that he made this last year, especially the ones dealing with Carolina, because I know that there was a lot of, I would say, unjust blowback, but man, did people not like him after a while. And when you look at Carolina and the line change in coaching that they've got going on there, almost a practically brand new staff, it does have its impacts about personal likability and ability to have a good, trustworthy working environment. So you struggle with some of this kind of stuff too, but one thing that I have been impressed with by the Massachusetts Pirates ownership and front office, one thing that I've been impressed with the NAL and Chris Siegfried and all those guys, one of the things that I think is really important with all this is that those doors may be closed, but they're always unlocked. There's always an opportunity to reopen the door and reassess sometime later. Mm-hmm. And I think if there's a possibility to do that, Massachusetts could come back in. Plus the other factor is where else is Massachusetts going to go? They're not going to go to the AAL. The West Virginia Rough Riders said they weren't going to go to the AAL. But there are teams like Cape Fear and Massachusetts and I guess an expansion rumored in a couple different southern areas that you don't know where they're going to go. And, it's just, it's an awkward spot right now. I think one of the other teams that nobody's talking about is Gulf Coast, playing out of Fort Myers there. I mean, they ran rickshod over the A-League, and the A-League lost its cornerstone member in the Florida Tarpons because they lost all their money trying to get that thing started up. You could see that you could possibly see Gulf Coast jump leagues and the A-League completely disband and Gulf Coast Fire jump up into the NAL. That might be a real possibility too. So, as far as the NAL goes, nothing's going to surprise me besides like the initial shock value. Like I'll look at it and go, whoa. And then afterwards, like I won't be shocked anymore just because good or bad, unfortunately.
Good. Yeah.
But yeah, so that's kind of the deal.
I just wanted to know what the thought process was with that, because I feel like that the NAL side of things is going to have to, in my personal opinion, just looking at the geographical footprint, there's got to have to be a bridge somewhere in between. I mean, you got 3 teams in the southeast and 4 teams in the southeast, and then you got 1 in the northeast. So it's kind of like that's a huge, discrepancy there, in my opinion.
Well, Maine hasn't actually filled their letter of intent yet. I mean, Maine went dormant, and so if they want to play, if they're able to play, then they're welcome with arms wide open into the NAL. The thing is that they still have to be financially stable with a local ownership group that is set, and they may not be ready yet.
Yeah.
So that might be another factor. And the other thing too, is in terms of the partnership would go, all things that I've heard is that, and this was one of the things that were kind of close but no cigar from that irresponsible page, is that there would be 12 games, 6 teams would play a home and home, and they'd be at like different points in the year.
Yeah.
It would make it more along the lines of like the SEC, when the week before their rivalry games all play teams from 1 or 2 FCS schools or FCS conferences. They'd play them at one, like halfway through the year, and they'd play them one time at the very beginning of the year, and all be on the same week, so it wouldn't be that out of place for people, that kind of stuff. It would kind of be like a nice little showdown type deal. But when you think about it that way, as one home and one away, then really there's not a whole lot there in terms of travel that really has a big impact there.
All right, Brice, thank you very much for joining us. How can we get a hold of you, and where can we listen to your show, my man?
You can find me on Twitter at @BriceBurge, BriceBurge, compared to just regular Brice Burge, because somehow, some way, that Twitter handle was already taken. So that Brice Burge, and then you can listen to all past episodes on www.mixcloud.com/AFTBuzz.
All right, Brice, thank you very much for joining us. As always, it's a pleasure. 310-876-8064 at AFN Talk across all social media, afntalk.com. Brought to you tonight by PrimetimeSportsTalk.com. Producer of the show, Harry the Boobs Bob. And till next week, thank you very much. Have a good night.